Welcome to a review of Chapter 21, which is Assurance, Attestation, and Internal Audit Services. In this lecture, we're going to focus primarily on attestation engagements. What we'd like to do first is go to a screen that we talked about very early in the semester related to assurance services. Now, everything within the scope is considered assurance service. Of auditing is where we are providing an opinion related to reasonable assurances as to whether these elements, whether the financial statements or the audit of internal controls over financial reporting, actually conform to a specific set of standards. What we're going to do in this lecture is focus on the next circle, which is our attestation element. Attestation has some of the same characteristics as an audit, but what we're going to find is that it's much broader. An attestation of service occurs when a practitioner or a CPA is engaged to issue or does issue a report, which is an examination, review, or agreed upon procedures. So you notice these three terms: examination, review, and agreed upon procedures. We need to understand specifically what these mean and how they relate to the context of an audit and other types of engagements. So what you notice here, that is an examination, has a high level of assurance. We are expressing an opinion, although what we'll determine is that the opinion is going to be a little different as compared to that of an audit. In a review, we are providing negative assurances, and then agreed upon procedures, we are providing a summary of the finding. You notice here in the attestation engagement is the CPA essentially is engaged to review information from a responsible party, which is the client, and this is for the use of a user. This user could be internal or external to the organization. An example of this is agreed upon procedures, which we will give some examples of in a few minutes. So attestation work comes with its own standards, and there's a couple things that I want to talk about that are going to be a little bit different than the standards as compared to an audit. But in any event, the attestation standards include general standards, standards of fieldwork, and standards of reporting. The first thing that we want to look at is the general standards. So you notice that the general standards for attestation are on the left. The generally accepted auditing standards are on the right. One of the things to keep in mind is these are standards coming from the AICPA. These have nothing to do with PCAOB standards, and in fact, based upon the PCAOB standards, these are not things that an auditor would be doing in a client which is a publicly traded client. So let's look at the differences related to attestation. The one thing that I want to point out is in the second standard, you notice that the practitioner must have adequate knowledge of the subject matter. Now, just in clarification, the standards for auditing does not require that the practitioner have knowledge of the subject matter, only that he or she has technical training and proficiency as an auditor, which is still a standard in the attestation. But the attestation goes further in the sense that you have to have knowledge of the subject matter. And again, as an example related to agreed upon procedures, you truly do need to understand the subject matter to essentially do the testing that is required. Standards of fieldwork. The key thing that we want to point out in the standards of fieldwork for the generally accepted auditing standards, you notice that in the second point is that the auditor needs to have sufficient understanding of internal controls to be able to plan the audit and determine the nature, timing, and extent of these audit procedures. So we talked about from an audit perspective that we do test of controls, we gain an understanding of the internal control environment, and this determines the nature, timing, and extent of our further testing, including our testing related to the substantive tests. In the attestation standards, there is no requirement for internal controls. The other two standards are very similar to the standards related to the audit, But again, the takeaway on this is that attestation standards do not require the practitioner to engage in an understanding of internal controls. Standards of reporting, similar in both cases. The key point relates to the reporting is what we're actually reporting on. This is the information that is in the book. I'm not going to go into the detail of this, but what we'll see when we actually look at some specific reports is the different language that is embedded in an attestation report as compared to that of an audit. So let's talk about an examination, agreed upon procedures, or a compilation. An example here is a financial forecast. And in a financial forecast, you notice that the opinion is, and this is the third paragraph, in our opinion, the accompanied forecast is presented in conformity with the presentation of a forecast established by the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. And again, the standards are the AICPA standards and the underlying assumptions. The limitation of this is, however, there will usually be a difference between the forecasted and actual results because events and circumstances frequently do not occur as expected. So this essentially is an opinion, but it is an opinion that is negative in the sense that what we're saying is that it's in conformity. However, it may not, the results may actually not be as what we would expect them to be. Standard report on the projection, very similar, is that we have an opinion. In our opinion, the accompanied projection is presented in conformity with the guidelines for presentation of a projection established by the AICPA, and the underlying assumptions provide a reasonable basis for management's projection, assuming the granting of the loan request for the purpose of expanding the plant as described in the summary. And then we have the however, even if the loan is granted, there's going to be differences. So what you notice here is that we are expressing an opinion, and the opinion is based upon the AICPA standards. However, the issue becomes is this is simply a projection, and we are not providing any assurances related to the projection as they relate to future activity. Agreed upon procedures is, as we talked about earlier, is agreed upon procedures are not in place to express an opinion. We are essentially doing specific agreed upon procedures, and these specific agreed upon procedures are primarily mathematical calculations, and what we are doing, and you notice the paragraph here is we are not engaged and did not conduct an examination. Accordingly, we do not express an opinion upon whether the prospective financial statements as presented are in conformity with AICPA presentation guidelines. An example of an agreed upon procedure that I've been involved with over the years relates to the Medicaid cost report. And essentially what the state of New York requires, that a CPA comes in and does specific testing on the report as presented by the hospital. We, as a CPA, is simply doing the testing as agreed upon by the state guidelines. We are not expressing an opinion as to the overall conformity of the cost report. Essentially, is all we're doing is very specific mathematical and ratio analysis of the cost report that gives the state an understanding that in fact the cost report is done correctly. We're not expressing an opinion, as all we're saying is that the calculations that we did are done in accordance with the requirements, and these calculations were correct. Let's go a little bit further and talk about compilations and reviews. Many non-public businesses do not choose to contract for an audit of their financial statements. However, these entities often employ a CPA to assist with preparation of the financial statement, tax returns, and other items. Keep in mind that as a CPA, you have a high level of credibility related to the presentation of the financial statements. So many clients are interested in having a CPA present and compile these financial statements. However, they're not interested in doing a complete audit. So a couple of things to keep in mind here is that in terms of level of assurance, Well, we've talked about the audit providing reasonable assurance. You notice that there's nothing that provides absolute assurance. In the middle is we have our reviews, which is providing limited assurance, and then finally no assurance related to a presentation or a compilation. In the compilation, we could, in fact, create a compilation when the auditor is not independent. A compilation is defined as presenting in the form of financial statements information that is the representation of management without expressing any assurances on these financial statements. An example of a compilation is a compilation report. A compilation is limited to presenting in the form of forecast information that is the representation of management and does not include any evaluation of the support of the assumptions underlying the assumptions. We have not examined the forecast and accordingly do not express an opinion. So in this case, the compilation is we are compiling, but we are not expressing an opinion of this compilation. We could complete a compilation with full disclosure. Full disclosure is it's identifying management as responsible for this presentation of the financial statements. Our responsibility is to conduct a compilation in accordance with the standards, with the statements on standards for accounting and review services issued by the AICPA. The objective of the compilation is to assist management in presenting financial information. The objective of the compilation is to assist management in presenting financial information in the form of financial statements without undertaking to obtain or provide any assurances that there are no material modifications. So we're essentially saying that we are not looking at this from and not providing an opinion related to whether or not there are material modifications within the financial statement. A review is the performance of an inquiry that includes analytical procedures to provide the accountant reasonable assurance and a basis for expressing limited assurance that no material modifications should be made to the financial statements. So in a review of the financial statement, a couple things to keep in mind is that we obtain a knowledge of the accounting principles. We obtain a general understanding of the entity's organization. We understand the accounting principles. We ask the entity's personnel about important matters. We do perform analytical procedures. If you remember, the analytical procedures are part of our risk assessment. So we're doing limited work related to a risk assessment. We do read the financial statements to determine if they conform to applicable reporting frameworks. We obtain reports from other accountants, if any, and we obtain a representation letter from management. So you notice we're not testing internal controls. However, we're going to identify the big rocks because we are doing some inquiries. We're doing analytical procedures, and based upon this, we're going to be able to determine, based upon our skill set of an accountant and auditor, if there are in fact issues related to the financial statement. So you notice here in the standard report of a review, and just remember how the presentation of an audit is that we're providing reasonable assurance. But in this case, what we're looking for is in the final paragraph, which is where we are expressing our statement related to material modifications. Based upon our review, we are not aware of any material modifications that should be made to the accompanied financial statement in order for them to be in conformity with accounting principles generally accepted in the United States. So we are providing a limited assurance, but this limited assurance is based upon a very limited approach related to our testing of internal controls. What I wanted to focus in this lecture are some very specific things related to our attestation. So I thank you very much for your time, and I'm looking forward to talking to you in our next lecture.